Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our very last class in forensic science for the summer semester. And congratulations on having made it this far. And most of you really have done really well. So today's class is actually a very brief class. It's no more than the briefest of introductions to this topic, which I want to emphasize I've included, despite the fact that actually I know very little about it. This is a very, very complex topic. The use of computers and mobile devices as sources of forensic evidence. This is a very, very complex topic, and it becomes more complex by the day, of course, as there are developments in technology. But I wanted at least to introduce you to the topic because I think that this may be something that a number of you might be interested in and in pursuing as careers. So you'll forgive my lack of expertise in knowledge about the topic, but I'll give you just the briefest of introductions. You can go to your textbook and read those relevant chapters, but of course there is a plethora of other information that will be available to you. So having said that, we realize, all of us now, we carry in our pockets a little computer. This was not always the case. 20 years ago, the mobile phone could not be really considered as anything but a primitive computer, as we'll see in a minute. But nowadays, in actual fact, analysis of mobile phones and analysis of personal computers, at least, there's very little difference between the two of them. In actual fact, they are directly comparable with one another in capability and everything else. And especially as we move to 5G systems and as cloud memory storage is expanded to mobile phones as well as to personal computers, really they are directly comparable with one another in all their capabilities. Maybe for some phones that are currently in use, the biggest difference between them would be the speed at which some algorithms run on a cellular phone compared to a computer. And second of all, there may be less storage, there may be less memory on some phones compared to a computer. But as I say, with the development of 5G technology and the expansion of cloud storage to both computers and to cell phones, really there becomes very little difference between the two of them. Practically all of us have one of these devices, whether it's a smartphone or an Android device, and there are various others. They are all comparable to one another in their capability, despite the fact that they come every couple of years and tell you that you have to buy a new one. They all depend on certain basic principles of technology. So the very first thing, just let me check on one thing before I go any further. Sorry. So we are very used to using this term very loosely, cellular phone. We say we have a cellular phone, or that we subscribe to a cellular phone network or a cellular phone company or whatever. So we need to think about what that term cellular means, because it was a very important development. It was the signal development in the evolution of cell phones. And what it does, what cellular system is a network. It's a network of transmitters, of devices which can transmit a signal as well as receive a signal over a relatively short distance. They're not very strong. They do not produce a very strong signal, but they talk to one another over a relatively short distance. And they can be despite the fact that they're low power transmitters, they are talking to our phones, which are even lower. They're even lower power in terms of their transmission ability. So what a cell network does, it's a whole network of these antennae that can all talk to one another over a distance, and you can string that out geographically. A cell phone moving into that network of antennae will actually begin to communicate with the different antennae. What the cell phone does is it continually sends out a test signal called a ping. And a cell phone tower, an antenna picking up that ping, will talk back to the phone, and it will tell the phone how strong their communication is. And at the same time as that ping is going out to that antenna, it's going out to other antennae, and the antennae can talk to one another, and a decision is made about which antenna will give the best signal to that phone. And for a time that they will talk to one another, and that antenna can then talk to other antennae. The antenna can amplify the signal and send it to another antenna. That antenna will send it to another. The destination decided by what address you put into your phone. You call somebody in another city or whatever. Your phone pings, establishes connection with the nearest cell phone tower. You talk to that cell phone tower, and the cell phone tower then talks to an entire network and sends the message on. That is the meaning of the term cellular. The cell part refers to everything, all of those antennae talking to one another, and your phone's ability to talk to those antennae. The antennae are continually monitoring how strong signals are. And as you move, the signal you have with the one antenna will begin to fade, and another one will begin to increase. You're continually pinging, they're continually talking to one another, and you will get handed over to the next most suitable antenna. Now you're entirely dependent on a network of antennae that will carry on talking to one another. And many of us have had this experience. You drive out into the heartland, and the antenna towers stop, and you lose your cell signal. You lose your cell signal because, in fact, your phone is a weak transmitter. It needs relatively close proximity of towers in order to be part of the whole network. Now, the great significance to forensic investigators is that a record is kept of all of those little pings, and a record is kept of all of your interactions with those cell phone towers. So, in fact, your phone is communicating with several phone towers. It picks one as the chief, the one that gives the strongest signal, but it is also talking to others. And a forensic investigator, for example, if they can get records of your phone's chatter to those different cell phone towers, a forensic investigator can triangulate. They can see which phone towers. Let's just say you have just 3 phone towers that you're talking to, right? And one on either of the points of the triangle, and your cell phone will be somewhere in the middle there, somewhere in the middle. And it can often, if the cell phone towers are close to one another and the communication was good, it can be narrowed down to quite a narrow geographic area where your phone was located. And this can be extremely useful. It can tell forensic investigators a location of your phone, and it can also tell the forensic investigators how that phone arrived there and how it left, because the cell phone tower preceding will have records, and the cell phone towers afterwards will also have records, as long as your phone was on. This is a big caveat. Once a cell phone is switched off, many of these capabilities stop. Not all of the capabilities of the cell phone necessarily stop. when you switch a cell phone off, there are certain functions in your cell phone which remain on. It doesn't necessarily go absolutely dead. In the old days, you could take out a battery and render your phone absolutely dead. Nowadays, with our current phones, that's very difficult to do. And there are certain functions which will remain on. And as cell phones become more and more sophisticated, those small functions that remain on may also acquire forensic significance if they can be extracted. There's a very important thing to say, though. All of this information that is kept by, that is established by interaction with these cell phone towers and everything, this kind of metadata, is actually the property of the cell phone company. It is not your property. There is this whole area of mobile device and computer information is an area of great controversy. But the current understanding is that what is on your phone is actually your property. But what is kept, what is established by in the network and everything else, that is the phone company's property. Any information must be gathered under warrant, except for one particular circumstance, which I'll describe in a while. But anything on your phone, any metadata must be gathered by warrant. And it proves extremely difficult in many cases to persuade phone companies to give up that metadata. They do not like to do it. Because in addition to that metadata of where your phone was, may also be records of the phone call, not what was said. That disappears completely unless you recorded it on your phone, in which case it would be available in your phone. But no record is kept of your phone conversation. Your phone conversation disappears and in any case would be privileged unless there was a warrant to tap into your phone. But the metadata remains, and the metadata will contain information about the phone numbers that you were calling, which is often critically important forensic information. The phone companies do not like to give that up. And even if authorities get a warrant to obtain that information, the phone companies very often will fight bitterly to stop them from accessing it. It is ultimately can be obtained, but forensic this is not easily available information. Okay, so let's have a look at the history of cell phones. The early cell phones, not cell phones, but the early mobile phones. They were not cell phones yet. These were actually like radio transmitters. They were analog. These we call the 1G. So in fact, the G usually it refers to generation. So the 1G. They were analog devices. They were essentially just like the phones that you use attached to the wall, the rotary phone or whatever, where on a rotary phone, the signal is sent over a wire. But in the early mobile devices, they were essentially radios. They sent the same thing by analog by radio wave. The revolution in mobile devices took place when they were devised to convert the information, both the sound and everything else, or whatever other information they transmitted, to convert it to computer language, to bits of information, which could be sent out over a phone network. And the 2G systems, the famous ones were the Palm devices and Blackberries, these sorts of devices. They functioned as phones. You could speak over them, make calls through them, and they had some ability to transmit data. So you could send text, and some other kinds of data as well could be sent. they were known as feature phones, and they had a big drawback, and that was that they were sending, although they were using computer technology, in that they converted the information into bits of information which were sent. It was sent over a regular phone network. And it was very slow, and it was, the amount of information that could be sent was very limited, despite the fact that they were digital. And the next generation of phone, in fact, many of us would still be using. And these were things which the 3G system, the early flip phones, and these kinds of things. These were 3G system, third generation. And what this did was it used other algorithms which compressed the digital information and allowed it to be sent as broadband data. So in other words, they could now, because the internet was now being established, these systems could access the internet. They didn't have to use a direct phone system. Instead, now the phone system, speaking to somebody, was essentially really divorced from all of the other functions of the phone. And now the phone could begin to access the internet and access broadband information relatively quickly, and allow a lot of information to be sent digitally. And this is what opened up the market to the smartphone, which is really like a small miniature computer, which allows the development of applications, of apps, this kind of thing, but also allows all sorts of other capabilities through the internet, web surfing, all of that sort of thing. Now, as we say all of that, realize that somewhere along the line, a record may well be kept of all of the activities that take place on the phone. And that becomes forensically very interesting. The phone is starting to do all sorts of things that the owner doesn't necessarily realize. The phone is beginning to serve as a record of lifestyle, not just of mundane calls and things, but of actual lifestyle, where the person is, what they are interested in, what is sparking their interest at a particular time. So the 3Gs of phones had tremendous capability, but they were relatively slow. And many of the 3G systems, for instance, you had to switch off apps. If you wanted to use one app, you couldn't have another one running simultaneously. It used up too much bandwidth. So you'd have to. So there were limitations. The 4G systems, which is what most of us now are quite used to, are those which access the internet directly and quite separately from all of the other functions. It allows very rapid internet access, and it divorces internet access, in actual fact, from the cell phone networks. It allows direct access to internet systems. They also allow satellite access. As we know, if you ever run your geolocator or anything like that, you're communicating with a satellite system. From your phone, you're communicating to a satellite system, which is quite extraordinary. 5G systems, which are being instituted now, of course, all over the place, they are basically the same, excepting that they increase the bandwidth enormously. They increase the speed of activity tremendously. And now with 5G, really, in fact, some phones at 5G have higher capability than personal computers, although the cost of computers will soon catch up. They allow now very rapid communication, 10 gigabytes per second, which is an extraordinary amount compared to what we were dealing with even 5 years ago. And this is comparable to having your phone connected to a fiber optic system or a cable communication or something. But it's still using the cellular systems and everything. Just they have been upgraded to this very, very rapid. Here's the thing. The more we use our phones, the more they become integrated into our lives, the more we allow our phones to follow us around, the more information is lodged on those phones, or lodged in the cloud or wherever, or in the cell phone towers, in the metadata records, et cetera, et cetera. And it may become very important to have somebody who is able to access that data and analyze it in the light of a crime, for example, which has taken place. So in actual fact, our phones are not just one device. They are really several devices crammed together in this amazingly small space, which we can put in our pocket. And the first, of course, is the phone system, which is used for voice communication. And many of us have the experience that, in fact, nowadays, often that is the weakest link, right? That is the poorest technology very often. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that there is a separate device for accessing internet. That is an entirely different thing, an entirely different part of the cell phone. Thirdly, there's usually, almost invariably now, there is some geolocator system, GPS system, which is talking to satellites, which give a very, very accurate geographic location. In motor cars, things like this, of course, there are many computer devices, which may also be of great interest to a forensic scientist. But one of them, one set, are the things like Garmin, all of those geolocated devices. These all keep a record, as long as they're on, they keep a record of geolocation and can be an extremely useful record for a forensic scientist. The caveat is that it has to be switched on, but I'm willing to bet, if I was to ask you all to take out your cell phones, don't do it. But if you were to look at your cell phone, just check through your cell phone and see if your GPS, if there is a GPS function switched on. For most of us, it will be. You'll notice that very frequently, different apps will flash on and ask you, can we access your GPS? And if you say yes, you have choices very often. No, while the app is being used, yes, or constantly. Many people will say, yeah, do it constantly, whatever, and do not realize that it turns their GPS on, and the GPS keeps a detailed record of your geographic history, the history of your geographic location. By the way, this is entirely separate from the fact that you can get metadata from the cell phone towers, which we can use to track the geographic history of the location of the phone. So the two fit together, right? And the two can be put together to provide very powerful evidence of geographic history. Here's the other thing about the phones. They are storing a huge amount of other information as well. First of all, the phone itself, they do vary in the amount of memory they have in the phone, but now with cloud storage, which many of us, we automatically storing up to cloud storage the whole time, the amount that phones actually end up storing can be absolutely enormous. So the first thing that is present on your phone, if it can be accessed, is a call log. A log of all the numbers that you have called and that have called you, and all you have to do to access that, go to recent on your cell phone, and you'll begin to see a history of calls that have been made back and forth. There is no record of your cell phone conversation. That is not kept. But if you record a cell phone conversation, if you hit record deliberately to record a cell phone conversation, that will be stored and may become available. So call logs, first of all. Second of all, SMS text messages, these are kept. There is a record. Those do go into history. A detailed internet browser history is maintained for all of the history of your phone, even available if you delete that history. There are ways of accessing it. Recorded, as I've said, recorded messages, phone conversations. If somebody leaves you a recorded message because you didn't pick up your phone, that is accessible. Oh, obviously photos, video, we use the whole time. Your geolocation histories, as long as the geolocator was switched on, which in many cases it will be. And very, very importantly, most of the deleted material, most of the material which you think you have deleted from your phone actually can become accessible to a skilled investigator. Much of it. Some of it will disappear, but much of it will be still be accessible, even though you can't access it. Okay, so here's an important thing to note. As most people have a phone in their possession, if somebody is arrested, the Supreme Court has said that in actual fact, the phone can be seized as evidence. And provided that that phone is switched on, there are certain things which can be done with it without warrant. But if the phone is locked, if it is switched off, then access to the data becomes extremely limited. And it becomes very difficult for investigators to access that data because there is a constitutional protection. The Fourth and Fifth Amendments protect you from having to give up information. And that includes divulging a password. You are not obliged to give up a password so that law enforcement can open up your device. There was a recent case where a cell phone of a deceased person was believed to contain extremely important information, but it was switched off and nobody knew the password. And they asked the company, Apple in actual fact, to open this phone. And there was a huge, huge court battle. Eventually, the phone was opened, but it was not opened by the company. It was opened by another company under court order. They did manage, after a great struggle, to open this phone and access the information. But that was an exceptional circumstance. It was a deceased person's phone. A living person's phone, it's virtually impossible, unless you willingly divulge the password so that it can be opened. But very often, phones will be seized while they are on and unlocked, as the person would be using them, right? And it has to be kept in that state so that, because there is a certain level of access that is permissible under warrant. There is a certain access which is permissible, but the phone has to, first of all, the phone has to be attached to a power source so that it doesn't discharge. The second thing is that the phone has to be kept exactly in the state that it is seized. That means you do not want this phone pinging to other cell phone towers and acquiring information and divulging information as you transport the phone, for example. So it is usually put into a bag like this. It's called a Faraday bag. I just do one thing. It's called a Faraday bag, and it isolates the phone from radio and magnetic waves and everything else, and ensures that it arrives at the investigator, at the laboratory, whatever, in exactly the state in which it was seized. So the forensic investigators, this is why I only give you a limited amount of information. The forensic digital investigator, they have many, many, many electronic and digital tools at their disposal to begin the investigation, but they are dealing with tens of thousands of different kinds of devices, tens of thousands of different systems, many different operating systems, et cetera, et cetera. There are more than 50,000 types of mobile device in use worldwide. And they go all the way back to 1G. Okay. Oh, there's still 1G devices from which information can be extracted. Not much information, but some can be extracted. And modern devices are extremely diverse, and they also have many systems, for example, of encryption and all sorts of things, which make interpretation of their information extremely difficult. So first of all, a lab like that has an enormous amount of equipment. Just think of all the different connectors and everything that they would need for a very start. But as we said, a phone, or in fact a computer as well, is not just one device, it's many devices put together. So there's the digital signal processor that you use to do your talking and to do your texting, etc. There's microprocessor, just like in computer, there are microprocessors which serve as computers. There's transmitter receiver. That's different to this. This is what produces the bits of computer information from your voice, etc., or from your text, whatever. This is what actually sends and receives, and then it has to be reinterpreted. There are several audio components, as we know, who use our phones for listening to music and everything as well. And there's power supply. The power supply in itself has its own microprocessors associated with it. And believe it or not, the power supply may also contain forensically useful information. All of the systems associated with the power supply may be open to interpretation and provide forensic information. This whole area of forensics is one of great controversy because it is not clear what the nature of that evidence actually is. Okay, this is computer evidence. This is not written. Is this written down? Who does this belong to? Does it belong to the phone company? Belong to the computer company? Does it belong to the person who owns the phone or the computer? It has become an area of great controversy, and the Supreme Court is regularly being called on to make decisions that have come up from court decisions further down, where this has come into contention. So it is clear, the Supreme Court has made it clear that at an arrest, for example, or at a crime scene, the phone itself can be seized and entered into evidence just like any other piece of physical evidence. But search of its contents is the area of contention. And it is search of the content is subject to warrant. If, as I said, if it's locked by password, an owner cannot be compelled to divulge it. You are protected by the Fourth Amendment, but you're also protected by the Fifth Amendment that you cannot be obliged to provide evidence which may convict you. That is your Fifth Amendment right. Cell phones are regarded by the Supreme Court as being computers. And so they suggest that a cell phone is actually rather like, now you can think of it this way. It's like an office. It's like a room in your house, which contains file cabinets with all sorts of information about your life, all sorts of things. If they are interested in a crime, remember you can only collect information which is pertinent to a crime. you have to specify, I need to collect this, this, and this because they may be pertinent to a crime. A computer, a cell phone, may be full of information which has nothing to do with the crime. Authority cannot go rifling through at random, just in the hopes that they'll find something. It has to be specified, specified what they are looking for. The Supreme Court, however, does authorize authorities to look through a cell phone at the scene, to actually see what the owner of the cell phone was seeing at the time, or was able to see at the time. But they cannot go further than that. They cannot go grabbing around in your files, for example, in your memory, and that sort of thing, without warrant. And here's, if you are interested, here is some explanation of the Supreme Court strictures on search and of cell phone data. So presented to a forensic investigator with a warrant which allows them to pursue a digital examination of the device. This is what, these are the sorts of things that they do. And in fact, this, if you look through this, is almost a pyramid of difficulty, a pyramid of expertise. Manual extraction is what either the officer flipping through the phone at the scene may be able to do, or what may be immediately done is just what the owner would be able to see, right, and be able to read off the phone. That is manual extraction. Logical extraction is downloading and analysis of the data, and is coupled with physical extraction, in which, for example, they very often will create copies. They will create copy of all of the data so that they have the original, which they're dealing with, connecting the phone to the computer and analyzing. Then they have a copy of the original. And that is very important in court to show that it has not been altered. The processes of analysis may in fact be very complex, especially if stuff has been encrypted and that sort of thing. Chip off is removing things like the SIM card and subjecting them to detailed analysis. And micro read. Micro reading is going into all of these other things, the geolocator, the microprocessors, the microprocessor attached to the battery, etc. All of these, now they may well be able to extract the useful information just with these here. Just with the first, they may proceed to these steps if stuff has been really well hidden, if it's been deleted for a long time, if the phone has been damaged, sometimes if the hard drives have been deliberately damaged, that sort of thing. They may need to go into the higher level extraction in order to extract the information. So that just so here's, quite apart from the fact that you may be able to read off useful information, what is kind of information is pertinent to a crime? Well, you will very frequently hear, for example, that people have used their phones or used their computers and searched the internet for information relevant to a crime in which they are implicated. That is it's completely circumstantial, but it's a very strong indicator that you are on the right track. If somebody is looking up detailed information about how to make their own poison at home and their spouse ends up dying of similar poison, and it's circumstantial, but it's very strong circumstantial evidence that there is some direct involvement. But one of the most useful areas is to look at call history. because call history very often betrays associations, and it betrays bizarre associations, especially unusual associations. Somebody, for example, who is an upper class, middle class person, and has no drug history or whatever, all of a sudden a number appears in their call history associated with a drug dealer. And then the number begins to appear more and more and more often. And it reaches a crescendo in the weeks preceding a crime, in which both that drug dealer and the caller are implicated. What does this begin to suggest to you? It begins to suggest that people have been coordinating with one another in preparation for a crime. The calls stop immediately after the crime. The crime is a marker point. There's a crescendo of calls leading up to the crime, and suddenly the calls stop. What is the marker point? What is the signifier? It's the crime itself. What is the linker? The linker is the phone call record between these two people, both of them showing this association with the crime. These show linkage, and what is very often done now is that these things like the call record, things like the geolocation of that phone, the phone's movement through the area of a crime, etc. These can become extremely important, and but they need to be linked to the other facts of the case, to the other forensic information. These are causal chains of evidence. This is what they refer to, causal chains of evidence. They are very often circumstantial. They're not definitive in saying that this person definitely did it, but they are very often strong circumstantial evidence and of tremendous importance. The linkage of all of these together is called hybrid crime assessment. And a hybrid crime assessment, it's always been the case, of course. We've always linked blood evidence with fiber evidence, with witness statements, etc., etc. Any investigation is really a hybrid assessment, but hybrid crime assessment is a specific technique of deliberately ensuring that as many different aspects become part of the investigation. And nowadays, digital phone and computer information is often proved to be the critical aspect in solving crime. So I'm going to stop talking there. And I strongly encourage those of you who are interested in computers and in digital matters and in forensics, think very carefully about this. There are courses, not at St. Francis College, but at other colleges, that you can do in digital crime, digital forensics, which you might be interested in. This is a short class, but I want you please to first of all, just read this news clipping about this very famous case. And then please do now sit down and watch this. It is a Dateline episode, so it's longer than forensic. But this is a fascinating case where mobile phone investigation, forensic investigation of mobile phones actually cracked the case wide open. Okay. And with that, I say goodbye. I wish you all well. Don't forget, please, that although you're writing your exam over the weekend, it will be available from Saturday all the way through till Sunday. There is a movie on Monday. Now, I know it's not going to be examined, and it's entirely up to you as to whether you watch it or not. But it is such an important ending to this forensics class that I really do encourage you, please, to make an effort to watch it. Okay, that'll be up on Monday. All right. I bid you all goodbye and thank you very much.